Hello, this is Brian Smith, and welcome to Podcast on Wheels, powered by Power Loops. Today, we've got a very special guest. He's been on Jimmy Kimmel Live. He's been featured in Nashville Business Journal. He's been on the cover of the Bowler's Journal. This guy's a Guinness World Record holder. He's not only all of that, he's also the host of the Charge Forward podcast and the owner of Charge Forward Solutions. And most importantly, you know him as the Backwards Bowler. Welcome to the studio, Jim.
Hey, man, thanks for having me on.
Brother, as I get to know you and I learn things about you, I look at it and I go, the backwards bowling, how did that come about? And what would prompt you to try that?
Man, honestly, I was not a bowler. I was out with some friends one night. This was 20 plus years ago. A bowling center there in Clarksville, Tennessee had just opened, so it was the place to be. So I jump over there after work. I'm bowling with some friends of mine, and they were bowlers, and they took it serious. Just so happens a couple minutes later, I had 2 or 3 tables of my customers that showed up. So everybody knew me, and I had only been in a bowling alley a few times in my life, and I was terrible. I mean, just as bad as you can imagine, that was me. And just as a joke, maybe a few too many adult beverages and some ego got involved, and I decided to throw a ball behind me. So I chuck a ball behind me. Very first ball's a strike. I walk back up to the table, and instantly all my friends are mad. And, at 21 years old, you got something that aggravates your friends. Well, that meant great. I'm like, really? That's all I got to do to piss y'all off? And they were like, no, seriously, you don't do that. Well, why not? I just did it. So they bet me any ball in the pro shop I couldn't shoot 150, and it took about 6 weeks, and I shot 163. And then by then I was better backward than I was forward, so no reason to turn around. And that's really kind of how it started. Ended up in 2005, I went to the national tournament and made some waves there. They did some interviews, and a guy approached me from ABC, and he said, "This is going to be everywhere. I hope you're ready." And I didn't know what he meant. And 2 nights later, I get a phone call from Jimmy Kimmel, Good Morning America, and the Today Show. And they all called my cell phone number. And I said, "How are you getting in touch with me?" And she goes, "Well, we have everybody's phone number." And I didn't really understand what that meant back then.
Right.
These days I do, being in the data industry. But, ended up being on Jimmy Kimmel and Good Morning America, then ended up doing Good Morning America again. We were hired as the entertainment for the first Disney bowling center that opened in Orlando, the old Tower Records location. And so that was exciting. We were on 75 TV channels around the world. And it was just lane to lane to lane. Everybody got one shot, and everybody wanted to strike. And so, it's been fun. It's allowed me to travel the world. I've got great sponsors. Big shout out to Brunswick and Hammer Bowling and the team over at CTD Bowling. I've got fantastic people around me.
Yeah, and that's, as I read some of that it started out on a bet, and then, you got the invite to the show. And as we were prepping for the show today, the one thing that I say resonates when I hear you on other shows, etc. The reason I wanted to get to know you is because I'm like, okay, he bowls backwards. There's no way I'm beating him backwards. But, if he bowled forward, would I have a chance? So you told me the exact date the last time you bowled forward, right?
Oh, yeah. So that was the night that I was on Jimmy Kimmel. So that was July 1st, 2005. And, it's just not something that I do. Here's an interesting thing for you. Like if I throw 2 or 3 balls forward, my arm hurts. It's actually a different muscle structure that you use to throw a ball forward than backwards.
Sure.
So it's just one of those things. It's an oddity, but it's allowed me, I kind of put it this way. It's one of those things I had to get really good at it. Otherwise I was a joke.
Right.
And I didn't want to be the joke. And I didn't want to be negative for the sport. There's still plenty of haters out there. There's still plenty of people that hate me. But there's far more that respect me. And then, I've been hired by USBC multiple times to do trick shot shows. And, that's to generate interest around bowling. I was on ESPN. It's been a while ago, like 12, 13 years ago.
Okay.
The shot that was on ESPN was literally I was throwing. This was live in front of a few thousand people. But I threw it through a chair, over a ramp, over 3 pins, and then made a strike. with the kind of social media and YouTube and that kind of stuff, anybody can make a trick shot, but can you make it live? Knock on wood, I've never missed a trick shot live, and I hang my hat on that. I mean, and that's one of the reasons I don't do it for free. If somebody wants me to come out, they pay for it. And
Yeah.
it's because every single time I'm putting my reputation on the line, because it's hard to do these. And for you to do it well enough and to be able to kind of operate in that stress level and pull it
Mm-hmm.
off, there's just not that many people that are geared for it. And I'd say this in business and in bowling, just kind of across whatever discipline you're in. Anybody can make it look hard, but if you make it look easy, you might just inspire somebody to believe in themselves.
Brother, there's so much you can unpack right there, as you already do, right? And it's like, that's what I hear inside of you. I didn't know you previously when you lost maybe a half a person and you're going towards this other direction health wise and all these things. But, you know, I don't guess there's anything that you do halfway at all in your life, is it?
Well, my wife will tell you I'm all about extremes, and which is a struggle when it comes to balance. And I think your wife is probably the rock that you have that kind of keeps you grounded too. And so we're so thankful and we're so fortunate to be in those spaces. But I kind of put it like this: whether we're talking about business or whether we're talking about bowling, my goal is to do things that people don't think are possible, and then make it look so easy that somebody else thinks that they can do it.
And just take us right there, because this is something that got me excited. Take us through the different levels of businesses that you've been able to accomplish and been through.
Yeah, so I've been in a lot of different spaces. I started out at Circuit City, as a kid. It was my first job, and I'm so thankful for a conversation that happened, because on about day 4, everybody was in the break room and I was in the training room. Back in the '90s, you're watching those god awful tapes
Yeah.
and learning how to talk to people, right?
Right.
And everybody's in the break room and there's the water cooler talk, and they're all mad about the top sales guy, which I didn't know that's what he was, but they were talking about how he took 2-hour lunches.
Yeah.
And so the store manager comes in and he's like, "How's your training going?" And we're having a kind of a good dialogue. And I said, "So when do 2-hour lunches start?" And he kind of laughed and he goes, "Jim, that's Taylor. That's top sales guy." And I said, "Cool. I want to be a top sales guy." And he kind of chuckled a little bit. He didn't laugh, but he chuckled. And he goes, "Jim," he goes, "I'm not under any impression that that's what you're going to do. I hired you because you're a good guy. You're going to come in here. You're not going to give me a bunch of attitude. You're going to do what I need you to do. And, you'd probably be a pretty decent sales guy." And when I left that day, I was furious. Like, this guy doesn't think that I got it. And so I started watching what Taylor was doing. How did he act? What did he do that was different than everybody else? And it took me 7 months, but in 7 months, I was the top salesperson in the region, not just in the store.
Wow.
And so it gave me the confidence that if I really want to do something, if I study what it is that I'm going after, and I do it better than anybody else, then I can achieve whatever it is that I'm after. And fast forward, I offered Taylor a job about 10 years later, and because I was running a company, I took over a company. It was doing about $6 million at the time. And then before I left, I'd grown it to a little over 100 million. And, kind of during that path, we were Nashville's fastest growing business in 2017 and 2018. And you had to be in business at least 5 years before you would qualify for that, because they didn't want startups in there doing,
Right.
10,000% growth or whatever. But we kind of broke we kind of broke the mold when it came to that, because most businesses that were on the list were in the 20% growth, 25% growth. And, I come on the scene in 2017 and, we won with 263% growth. And then I wasn't even concerned the next year. I knew that we won it at 393% growth. And I'm not going to lie, it ruffled my feathers a little bit when I got beat the next year. I came in second in 2019.
Yeah.
And, the ownership group, their desire to grow had waned, and so we were on two different paths. And in 2019, we came in. No, sorry, 2020, we came in ninth.
Okay.
And in 2020, I advised them to sell. I said, "Look, you're getting bored with it. You're doing things to kind of rock the boat to see what you can." Who you can aggravate, those kinds of things. And they did sell. So what I do now is I help other people grow their businesses the way that we did it. And that's where my passion lies. That's what's fun, is helping people that are already in business, they've kind of figured out how they win, but they don't know how to take it to that next level. And you really need a coach that has been through it before.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, there's nothing out there that says that somebody can't label themselves as a coach,
Right.
but it really comes down to, what have you done?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like let's just say a college professor is teaching entrepreneurship but never owned a business.
Right.
I mean, that's in theory. And so where your coach really comes into play is somebody that has been through that and conquered it before, and then helped other people do it. And so you end up being more of a guide. You kind of, help them navigate where they're at right now on their trajectory, and kind of avoid some pitfalls along the way.
Yeah. And I had a conversation with us building a podcast studio in the back of a toy hauler camper so that we can travel around. And I can't wait to get it up there again so we can have you in studio and everything. But I got a call from a guy. He had watched a show. He sent me a message, and I tried to respond to everybody. I called him, and we set up a call, and he said, "Hey, I've got a business idea. I'd like to run it by you."
Mm-hmm.
And we get on the phone, and I said, "Okay, where are you at in this?" He was looking, and not to go into detail, but he was looking at taking something similar to this and like redoing it, fixing it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Okay, all right. So where are you at right now with that?" "Well, I'm thinking about it." And I was like, "Okay, all right. Okay. Well, first I would probably get an LLC. Then I would probably go figure out a business name." And I said, "Then, figure that." But for somebody to call at that point, like, they've already got to establish all that, right?
Yeah, I tell people all the time, I am not a startup guy.
Right.
I'm not your coach for that. There's different levels of coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Think about, let's take golf for instance. I don't know if you've met Virgil Herring yet, but Virgil's a good friend, and he's been on my podcast. I've been on his,
Yeah.
and in fact, I introduced Nick and Virgil. Virgil's arguably one of the top 5 coaches in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and he gives so much praise to entry level coaches, but because of what they do. And he put it very, very, in fact, I think it's on the episode that launched today for my podcast, is he said, without those coaches, I wouldn't have people to coach.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, because it's a different type of person that gets in there and teaches people the basics and gets them interested in golf. And then there's only going to be a certain amount of those that get interested enough that they really want to be competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where somebody like Virgil comes to play. And so kind of the same thing in my world. I'm not a startup guy.
Right.
I'm not the guy that helps you walk through setting up your LLC, getting your bank account. I mean, yeah, I can tell you how to do all that, but there's no passion in it for me at that point.
Right.
You need to have already figured out how you win. You just don't know how to get to that next level. And a lot of my clients end up being kind of, they've done as much as they can possibly do and hold on to it by themselves. But they're afraid of hiring somebody. They're afraid of trusting somebody. And I've been there too. I remember when we had 15 stores, and I took all escalation calls. Well, I was getting 100 to 200 calls a day. And I remember thinking about adding another store, and I said, there's no way I can add another store because I don't have enough time to answer those calls.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to empower other people. And so, one example is sometimes I get teed up with doctors, and a lot of your doctors own a practice because they didn't want to work for somebody else. Well, especially when they come to me and they're looking to exit,
Mm-hmm.
they think their client list is worth a bunch of money, and it's just not. What's worth a bunch of money is a practice that runs without you. So really, with doctors and veterinarians, that kind of stuff, I tell them, I really need veterinarians. I mean, we can do that in a year. Doctors or dentists, you really need 2 years. I'd love to have 5, but I mean, usually in 2 years you can do it really successfully. But you've got to bring in other doctors. You've got to start kind of handing out the workload without losing empathy or that connection with your patients.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got to step back and run the business with other practitioners, because nobody wants to buy a business that as soon as you exit, it dries up. That's not
Mm-hmm.
worth much. But when you've removed yourself from the day-to-day seeing patients and you've hired people in so that you now run the business, well, now you have something to sell. Now you have something that when you get ready to exit is worth real money and you can enjoy your retirement. But one of the things that I love is a lot of times when we start walking through that process, when they grow up, when they make that transition or that gear shift from the owner operator to the business to running the business, a lot of times they fall back in love with the business and they never want to sell it.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times what we do with those is I structure it in two ways. One, it's either a percent when it gets sold, as well as the coaching along the way. And then if they decide to keep it, we also have a clause where we have equity or they can buy us out. There's a couple different ways to do that because I love it when they fall back in love with their own business and they remember why it is that they wanted to get into that,
Right.
but they feel like they've grown up,
Mm-hmm.
and they really have. So that's what gets me on fire these days.
And that's, it kind of reminds me as you're saying that, and I'm sitting back because I'm just, at the end of the day, I'm a baseball guy. That's the sport I played. That's what I coached, right? And I thought, okay, the teams that I that had that leader, you take that leader away from the team's worth jack, well, what young guy, and you sit back and you evaluate and you're looking at this going, not only has Jim been there, done that, he has the systems in place. There's no secret sauce. Each individual thing, I'm sure, has the little turns that alter the entire course, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
because that's what I appreciate about you guys and the network of guys that you've mentioned in this podcast, the integrity on top of everything, right? So speak to us on that, man, because I know that's important to you. So, the integrity, faith, etc.
Well, I'll go way back. Okay, so senior year, I missed getting most likely to succeed by 2 votes, and I was voted most trustworthy. And in the moment, as a 17-year-old, I was mad. But I will tell you, it's probably the best thing that ever happened to me because as I've grown up, I've always had that attachment to that moniker of most trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
And your reputation is everything, plain and simple. I'm not a nice guy. I'm a good guy. The difference between those two is the nice guy will lie to you to save his own feelings and your feelings. The good guy will tell you the truth, even though it might hurt, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where you have to be. I had to grow up as a coach too. As I was in leadership, I had a great coach, Chris Weinberg, here in Nashville, Tennessee. Fantastic coach. And as I was kind of growing up through that, I was always very cautious. I didn't want to drive too nice a vehicle because, my team members, they were, most of them were early 20s, and I didn't want to be that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I started leaning into mergers and acquisitions, because one of the things that has just served me very well over the years is I've been able to kind of read the writing on the wall and be ahead of some changes. And so in 2017, in 2015, and then again in 2017, there were 2 major changes in the business that I was in, and I was ahead of those. And so when that happened, everybody else was on a fire sale, and I was in the position to start merging and acquiring other businesses.
Right.
And on about the 3rd acquisition, I actually bought a truck from my coach. So my coach was selling his Lincoln pickup,
Okay.
and I bought it.
There you go.
And a month or so goes by, and he pulls in. We have our coaching session. He goes, "Where's the truck at?" And I said, "Oh, I don't drive it to work." And he goes, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to be that guy. I got an old Scion I drive to work, and I'm not trying to be that." And he goes, "Jim, at some point you got to figure out that if you don't live a life worth aspiring to, then you're not going to inspire people to be like you." And that shook me. I had never heard of it like that. And man, the next day I'm driving my Lincoln to work. But it made me be more transparent with my team because, one of the reasons that we were able to grow so fast and be out ahead of everybody is I didn't play telephone in my company. And what I mean by that is something that I did that I don't know anybody else at my level that did. So I was senior VP, and everything here in the United States was my problem. It was on me. good, bad, or ugly. And I started going out into the field and training. And I trained every person in person every month. And it took me almost 3 weeks out of every month in order to go into the field and do that. But there was no misconception. Everybody knew what the goal was, what their part in that was, and what victory looked like. And so, I had other leaders that were like, "Why do you waste your time with that?" I'm like, "Well, I'm outpacing you. I'm number 2 in the nation. What are you?"
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't to be mean, but I'm trying to get them to understand if you would go do this. And they were really kind of, "No, we're up here. We have somebody that goes and does that." Okay. Well, is it exactly how you would say it? Did it lose any passion along the way? I mean, my guess is it did. And then kind of as part of that, I realized that I had to invest in them. So much, like them or love them or hate them.
Right.
Alabama football, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nick Saban is an unbelievable coach.
Right.
But when he hit his stride, it was when he figured out that it wasn't just about wins and losses. It was about connecting with those players at a different level.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started teaching them about life. So in my 2-hour training, it might be an hour and 20 minutes of what we're doing as a company, how you help that, those types of things. But the other 40 minutes was about your money and your dreams and how do we help you get there. A couple things happen along the way. People start connecting at a whole different level because I know what your hopes and dreams are because we were in the same class. And man, I'm probably less likely to be a fill in the blank with whatever derogatory word you want to use. I'm less likely to be unkind to you if I know what you're here working for.
Right.
And so we just connected on a totally different level. And I would inspire I would ask that anybody give that a try. And the first time you're going to be bad at it. You're going to make mistakes. You're not going to remember everybody's names. I mean, and you'll be a nervous wreck. And then you'll start doing things to get people uncomfortable so that you can all grow together. Like one of the things I used to do is I used to yell. I mean, literally, first time I'd have people that were in a training for the first time, and it's like a joke because, get ready to start the meeting, and I'm like, "Woo!" And people falling out of the chairs, and that's too much. But hey, now we've gotten uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Now we can do something together, right?
Absolutely.
And so just get uncomfortable, plain and simple. I don't care if you're talking about health. I mean, whatever it is, family, whatever it is you're doing, the right answer is probably the hard thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And man, I say that, I started this podcast because I wanted to get to interview people. I wanted to get to meet people. I didn't know that I needed coaching from Jim and Michael Bird and Nick Hyde or Brad. Like, bro, I'm the most selfish host there could be. All right. So what I want to do here is like, you had those stories, but I'm gonna pull a story from you here.
Yeah, go for it.
The hitchhiker, can you please, because that resonated, that just kind of, as you're talking about building that team and getting to know and getting uncomfortable. So yeah, if you can share that one.
Well, here's what happens is the first thing that most entrepreneurs do is they hire people they like because they're like, I got to work with this person every day and all fill in the blank, all those things. When really the first person they should hire is the person that's great at what they're terrible at.
Mm-hmm.
You hire to your weakness. And then as you grow, you're going to have to get more in tune with what good interviewing looks like. And I've made every mistake you can make. I mean, when I tell you this, I mean, I'm firm in that I've made a lot of bad mistakes when it comes to hiring. I used to interview 3 people at a time, and then I would ask them to rate each other. And I mean, whoo, that gets ugly. So when I tell you I've made the mistakes, I absolutely have. But where I really got dialed in is where I started getting my team to understand that you had to know where somebody was trying to get to. And so the way that I explain it, and I know that it's kind of rough around the edges, is I explain it like a hitchhiker that's paying for gas.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that we're in Barstow, California. We're at the beginning of I-40, and I pull over and we have a conversation. Where are you headed? Well, if they're headed to Alaska, and I'm headed to Nashville, it might be cold outside. It might be unseasonably cold, and they just want to get into a car. Mm-hmm. Kind of like some people may just want to start earning a paycheck. But if I don't ask enough questions to really figure out where it is that they're headed, then the longer we ride, the more aggravated they get. And I get, as the business owner or the person that hired them or their leader, I get aggravated because I'm thinking, why are they being so ungrateful? Well, it's because they're getting further away from their goals. And if we look back 30 years ago, it really was this assumption of, oh, I'm doing you a favor by giving you a good job.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that employee is investing their time, their effort, all those things into that role at variable degrees of proficiency, but nonetheless, they're spending their life there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it needs to be headed toward their goal. And then the beautiful part is, if you look at it in that light and you truly find out what it is that they want to do long term, you may find out that they're going to Texas. And so that gives a clear jumping off point where I'm not under any false pretense that you're with me all the way to Nashville. And we both know that somewhere around Texas, it's time for you to exit. And then I wish you well. I'm supporting that as we're getting closer. I'm looking for your exit. You're looking for your exit. We're trying to make sure that, it all works out. Am I dropping you off at the right place? Did you get everything you needed out of the car? And I know we're talking in metaphors there, but
Right. No, but
it's a powerful thing. I had a young man that told me, and this, I worked in a business. I was in wireless, and it took me about 6 months to start making money on somebody. Until then, I'm just investing in training. And this young man, he was coming from a competitor, so the training curve wasn't very steep. But he said, "Jim, this is a temporary job for me, and usually that's not somebody I'm interested in." I said, "Okay, well, what does temporary look like?" And he goes, 29 months. I'm like, "Well, man, you give me 29 solid months, I ain't mad at you." I said, "What are you going to do?" And he goes, "Jim, I'm going to be a music producer." I said,
wow.
"Well, what's the 29 months for?" And he goes, "That's how long it's going to take me to save enough money and perfect my craft to be able to do it at the level that's going to allow me to be successful." And, I was like, "Great." Well, in my monthly meetings, I touch base with him every once in a while. We get to 24 months, and he goes, "Jim, this is my 90-day notice." And I'm like, "Pat, that's amazing.
Yes.
That's great." And
Yes.
the cool part about this is, the man, he did go on to do this. So the only reason that I know who Fetty Wap is, and I know Fetty Wap had some hit songs, is because Pat Hundley is the guy that produced that first hit by Fetty Wap. So he went out there, he did exactly what he said he was going to do, and I couldn't be happier for him. You know,
Yeah.
same is true for somebody that's going further than you.
Right.
You know, it could be that they're in college and this needs to be a job for them while they're in college. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
what are they getting out of it? Are they getting customer interaction out of it? Are they learning how to run a business? Are they learning how to do finances? Whatever parts of that business are there, there's a way to learn from it so that you come out the other side even more ready to go tackle the next thing. And again, if you get that firm understanding up front, and it's okay if somebody doesn't know. It's okay if they don't know where they're going. But we just need to start off on the right foot, and that we have as clear a picture as possible.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that just, you said you're speaking in metaphors, obviously, in that aspect, but it's a lot better than putting three people in a room and having them arm wrestle over who's the best to get the job, right?
Oh yeah, like I say, I've done some of the worst interviews on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Well, I
it
appreciate
all
it.
got me to there.
Yeah. Well, I had a meeting with a team member the other night. Now, as a former baseball coach, okay, I'll tell you this real quick. I always tried to establish, and this will kind of lead us to the next point, that relationship like you're talking about, and then in other businesses. So other coaches, other programs, other things. So sometimes I have to watch kind of how I ask a question because I'll ask somebody, okay, well, all right, you're talking about taking that trip because you want to be at that event, you want to meet that person, you want to get in this room, you want to do these things. But what are you giving up to get there? And who are you really? What is your time, your value? Is that, or do you just want to take a picture with that guy and say, so you've taken that and the relationships and the people you've met and things, it all has a place, right? Like it's all part of this vertical. So help us understand that as a guy like me who I was going to say 3, 4 years ago, I'm out on the hot turf in Atlanta, Georgia, 12 weekends of summer, you know, thanking God for the baseball, thanking God for my family. But then when the second kid gets 2, 3 years old, and I know we got similar age kids in our age, it's like, okay, they're gonna, yeah, we're gonna have to do a little more in business. So that's what kind of prompted me. But how could you help that?
Well, man, I will tell you, I've done that wrong too. And in my former life when I was growing that business, I even stopped bowling. So 2015, December 3rd of 2015, we get a phone call that rocked our world,
Okay.
and it was going to be a business killing problem. They changed the program, and we were going to be out of the program. And instead of freaking out, I literally sent my team out and said, we got to get back in the program, which meant we needed 3 more stores. And so we had been ahead of the curve and that we were doing the right things, and so we were selected as a growth partner, which
Mm-hmm.
meant we could add stores, but there were penalties along the way. Like it's not free to get right back in. And so, I called my bowling team that I've been on since 2001, and I said, guys, I'm out. And what do you mean you're out? Man, hopefully I can come back one day. I don't know, but I'm going to have to work. I got 125 people, and they got 3 people at home on average. I got 450 people depending on me to make this thing work. And so I became a workaholic when my son was 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I didn't work a lot before that, but for 3 years, man, I was at work. Period. And
Mm-hmm.
then 2019, January 11th of 2019, I stick a shovel in the ground and I decide to build my own house. On top of that, you know, for all the bad things that happened in 2020, one of the things that I woke up from was that burning desire that I had to be at work in order to be providing for my family. I was too out. I was one sided. And the way I describe it to people now is, in your life, it should be kind of like the guy making the dough on the pizza. He
Right.
stretches it and he rolls it and stretches it and rolls it. So it's always kind of misshapen. It's never perfectly round until kind of gets to the end. But he's not stretching all at once.
Right.
He's got to kind of keep it going around and around. And really that's how we have to do it. We have to focus. We have to know that there's always going to be something that's taking precedent, whether it's family, whether it's faith, whether it's the job, whether it's something else going on in your life, whether it's your physical well-being, those types of things. They're always going to be misshapen, but you always got to be working that dough and
Uh-huh.
be cognizant of where you're at. Be self-observant enough to know what's going on there. And one of the things that just rocked me is early on in my wife and I's marriage. She worked in Canada 4 days a week. Well, we didn't have kids at the time, so it actually worked out because I was a workaholic to some degree, and so there was nobody yelling and screaming that I wasn't at home,
Mm-hmm.
and it's because she was in Canada.
Right.
Fast forward, we have our son Castle, and the first year she was still traveling. Then the next year is kind of when my life got crazy on the travel side, and my son at maybe 2.5 years old packed some little motorcycle toys in my suitcase while I was in the shower one day
Mm-hmm.
so that we could play motorcycles together
Mm-hmm.
with me in the hotel and
Right.
him at home.
Right.
And that got me. And I was cognizant from that point on as to what was going on, but I didn't know how to get out of that wheel. And so, I tell people these days that if you're not cognizant, if you can't kind of step back and see what you're missing, then what are you working for? And that I'm not giving anybody slack on not working hard, but figure out how it all comes together. And so these days, I'm really always trying to figure out how do I marry the passions that I have in my life with the business. Like how am I adding those things together so that it's less like work?
Right.
And for me, I love doing the podcast. I know you do too.
Yeah.
And selfishly, I get to meet amazing people.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I also, my son has been on the podcast. He comes in, I'll shoot some time with him. Like,
Yeah.
hey, what's going on? And in fact, I had an entrepreneur on yesterday, and he calls me. his son is actually in my son's. They're on the same basketball team.
Okay.
And he goes, man, my wife got called into work. I guess I'm gonna have to leave the kids in the car. And I said, man, bring them into the studio.
Yeah.
And so, I assigned them a task. I'm like, Levi, and it's Levi and Paisley, or his son and daughter's name. And I said, all right, I need you to come up with a good question for the podcast to ask your dad. And so, you know what? We do our thing. We take a pause. We jump in. We let them ask their question. Of course, she busts him out. She's 6 years old, and she goes, Daddy, are you going to keep coaching my team for softball next year? Or are you going to stay back with the 5 and 6 year olds? And he says, no, honey, I'm going to coach as long as you want me to.
Yeah.
She fires back with question number 2 and goes, well, tell me this, Daddy, why are you so mean? And of course, everybody cracks up. It's, but that's what life's about. Life's about trying to figure out how you, at some point, can you be successful enough to kind of merge the passions that you have in life so that it's less like work and it's more like educated play.
Yeah, man. I mean, I was just reminded here in Madison, we have the AA affiliate for the Angels, and the Trash Pandas general manager, Garrett's a good friend of ours. But the first time I met him, I was trying to rent the stadium to do a baseball event when I had the teams. So I had at the time, I guess Brooks was 2 or 3, my son. And I'm like, okay, he's with me. Mama's at work. The other one's at school, right? Or whatever he was at. And I'm like, okay. So I call him G. So obviously but I'm like, G, bro, my son's with me. He goes, awesome. I'm like, can I? Yeah. And then I started getting around better people, right, Jim? Because who would want to do business with somebody that would say, yeah, leave your kids in the car? Like, I mean, really, at the end of the day, because I heard, and I got to give credit when I remember something, but Andy Elliott, I heard him say one time, and it could have been a clip or on stage or wherever we were, but he said, bring your family with you. Tell them what you're doing. My boys, now they go to school and they come back and they go, Dad, at the book fair, they cost this much. I said, well, what's the value? How many pages you get? What did you get with the book? Like, and teaching them how to budget their money and invest. So what are some stories? We've talked a little bit, and you've told us, but what about your kids? Give us a basketball. Give us a story about Jim as a family guy.
Man, it's fun. And, I might be creating a monster here. I started taking Castle to the bank with me when he wasn't even big enough to walk. And I've been banking with the same people since I was 6 years old. I opened my checking account when I was 6 years old.
Yeah.
And the same lady that opened my account still works at the bank.
Wow.
So, it's about relationships for them. So, big shout out to the team at Ashland City Pinnacle Bank. I mean, they're just fantastic people. And I started taking him to the bank with me. And this was before I was on the health kick. So, probably some bad habits in there. But I started training him that if we were putting money in savings, or if we were moving money from our checking to our savings account, or if we were putting money in the bank, he got a sucker. If we were taking money out of the bank, no sucker. Like I say, I'm not saying that this is what everybody should do. But I started teaching him that early. And then, I also started teaching him what investments look like. And so at 11 years old, he's a whiz on, say, the Dave Ramsey investment calculator. He knows how much money is in his Roth. He knows what it potentially is worth, and he knows what he can do to change that. And so, this year, so I got him a lawnmower about 5 years ago. So you're talking about a 6-year-old with a lawnmower.
Nice.
And, I did that because I wanted him to very early have a job, not just around the house. And so now, he just turned 11. So at 10 years old, so this past season, we've upgraded him in mowers, a couple times. Okay. So now he's got he's got a Gravely commercial. He mows 2 1.5 acre lots. He does the weed eating. Dad's just the transportation.
Right.
And, so he has to budget his time. He's got to call the customers. I will not deal with the customers. They are his customers. He's got to collect the money. Like, these are all things that too many kids aren't taught.
Yeah.
They don't know how to have a conversation and hold eye contact.
Right.
There was a study. I saw this yesterday. There was a study, and I think it was 69% of interviewers say that the interviewee can't hold eye contact.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And so I told him, I said, Mr. Davis, you got to go up, you got to knock on the door, you got to call him the day before to make sure that he wants you to come. You gotta ask him, is there anything that he wants done different?
Right.
And then when you get done, you ask him to walk the property with you to make sure that the job is as expected. And now it's just second nature. Now he's got his first full season of handling 2 clients on his own, having to cover his own expenses, having to have his mower worked on, all the things. He's got to call the guy. He's got to call the guy to set up the mower to be dropped off.
Yeah.
That's running a business. Why are we not teaching our kids how to be self-sufficient? And this is not a knock. I guess it is. I'm going to apologize. I'm going to apologize ahead of time.
No, because I got a story for you too. I got one.
Yeah. Well, so some friends of my son's, I took them to a race a few months ago, and so we're getting up there. We're after we enjoy the race, we are on the way home, and I stopped and we ordered lunch, right? Well, Castle goes up and he orders his order from Chick-fil-A, and the next kid goes up and he doesn't order for himself. He's like, I don't do that. I'm like, well, we're learning today. And, but it's like, why not have your kids speak for themselves? Why not teach them that right now so that you're not in a situation where you got to speak for them when they're 20? And again, everybody's got different parenting styles, but I'm raising Castle to be a monster. Yeah. I'm raising him to be an absolute beast, because I think with the way that things have gotten watered down, where we've beaten people up for being masculine,
yes,
and taking charge, where we get this toxic masculinity, which is just a joke in the world.
Right.
The reality is, I don't care if you're an extreme on the feminist side or extreme on the masculine side. Those are just bad people,
right.
or they got a bad attack plan. Yeah. But masculinity or femininity, there's nothing wrong with them. Embrace them. That's how God made us, right?
Yeah.
And so, in this world where things have been watered down, if our kids are just a little aggressive, if they're just a little forward thinking, my gosh, they will dominate.
Amen.
And so that's what we're here for. You, me, our wives. I mean, one of the things that comes up on my podcast frequently, and it was not designed this way, but it just started happening organically, is we start talking about how important spouse selection is to overall health, wealth, and happiness. And I don't know that there's
all of it.
I don't know that there's anything else. I mean, I think it is the number one, aside from being able to pick yourself up and go do things. It's the next thing that really kind of identifies is whether or not you're going to be successful and whether or not your kids are going to be successful.
Yeah. Well, quick story, and it was a Chick-fil-A. Right over here by our house. Let's see, the older guy that's still, he's sort of retired, but he hangs out at Chick-fil-A. That guy, most of them have one. Ours is named Steve. So Steve, I know that because my just turned 7-year-old, whatever he ordered, didn't come. So we get to the table, they bring us our food, we sit down, and he didn't get his. He orders the number 1 with extra pickles. So maybe it didn't have the pickles or something. And he goes, Dad, go tell them.
That's right.
And he stands up and he walks up, and there's people everywhere, and they look over him. And my mom was there with me. And my mom goes, help that baby. I said, I am helping him.
That's right.
He's got to speak. And now Steve, the older guy, sees him, helps him. Steve comes and thanks me for raising young men because he's from a former generation.
That's right.
So, I just think that's awesome. Now, do we have lawnmowers? Are we weed eating? Have we established a business? Are we calling customers? No, but I still got a couple years, so I'm going to catch up because, I sit down with Nick Hyder, and he's got a whole list of how Ethan gets paid, compensated, who does the job, what's the schedule. And you see these things, and I'm like, thank you, guys. My kids have somebody to compete with because it would be too easy, right? So
well, the reality is, I don't care what industry you're in, and I don't care what stage of life you're in. Every one of us should be actively stealing best practices every single day. The people that we're around, if they're not who we want to be, if they're not doing things that we want to do, we're in the wrong crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And so, every day I learn something from the people that are on my show. Every day, I mean, literally, the first time I saw a podcast on wheels, I was like, "Oh, that's a fantastic idea," because sometimes, and I will say one of the drawbacks that I have is I really like doing my podcast in person.
Yeah.
And so I got a whole list of people that I'm like, hey, when you're in Nashville, pop on. And it's because I'm like, we get so much more out of it. Now, because you and I both have experience on being in interviews and being interviewed and those kinds of things, we can work through it.
Sure.
But if you got somebody that's pretty new, even if they've got an important message,
right,
but they're not real skilled on bringing energy on camera, it's gonna turn out bad.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, no, for the integrity of the podcast, I need you to be here. And they're, well, I'm not going to be there till June. Okay, great. That gives us plenty of time to prepare and get excited about it, all those things. But I want your appearance to carry weight.
Right.
And so I love the podcast on wheels concept because you can go to them, and it's a business trip.
It is. And the coolest one, I got to give a shout out to a guy that Nick introduced me to, Bradley.
Okay. Oh yeah,
we parked.
Brad's a rock star.
He's cool, man. He's cool. One of the most generous guys I've ever been around. Whatever people see and all the stuff, like truly good, godly, genuine, generous. But we hooked this to my F-250, pull up to Cold Springs Mall, park. I get a text, where are you at? Next to Chili's and Belk or whatever the store is. Okay, cool. A truck parks. He jumps out, comes in here, and 3.5 hours later, we're in the parking lot talking about how he's protected his health and some stuff with Gary Brecka to this guy to, hey, if you're going to get, Tony Robbins in here, you're going to have to get it a little cooler. He likes this temperature. Like, we're just talking, but these are his friends. These are people he talks to, right? And it's like, this studio put me around those people. And it gave me opportunity because, just like you did, when you saw the motorcycles in the suitcase, when you started trying to adjust, like, okay, I still want to do all these things, but how do I do it the right way? And how do I make sure that my kid has a lawn care business and he learns and I'm there for him, right? So, love it.
Well, I think it comes back to faith too. And I get that there's a lot of people that don't want to talk about that, but you know what? We're being real here, and we need to talk about it. I think God puts people in our lives for a reason. It's not a mistake, and it's also kind of like whatever the old cartoon or analogy is, where God says, "I showed up 27 times, and you turned down my help 20." We have to be willing to see the signs.
Yes.
We have to be willing to accept the help.
Yes.
And then we've got to do something with it. Otherwise we're just ungrateful. And I think as I get older, I know this is, one of the things for me that as I get older, but I'm less tolerant of BS. I'm not going to let somebody steal my time because there's too many people out there that will take it and go do something with it. And, the way we used to talk about it at my former company is, think if you were the caveman that invented fire.
Mm-hmm.
And, there were these little tribes and they didn't have fire and you brought fire to them. It's their job to build it up and be able to share fire with other people. Well, if you come back and they've let the fire go out, you got to give them fire again. Well, at some point you get tired of giving them fire and it drains you. But when you go to that tribe and they have shared fire with thousands of other people, then it fills your well. And you're like, oh my gosh, look what this went. It went from rubbing two sticks together to now people are thriving. And the same is true with information. And don't get me wrong, there's a value to struggle. All right.
Amen.
We got to go through stuff in order to understand what we're made of and what we can do. But once we've done that, then we start to learn that I can pay for it with time and heartache, or I can pay for it with money. Is there a coach that can shortcut this for me? Is there somebody out there that has this expertise or that loves doing this and I hate it? And let's work together so that we create more. And so, with Nick and with that whole group that kind of comes together there, I selfishly love it because of the energy and the momentum that's created because of that collaboration.
Absolutely.
And so we're all doing more because we're doing things together.
Yeah, and every darn one of you is still just competitive enough to keep pushing that guy next to you. There's that, because I said it to Brad. I said, there's a lot more collab at the top. There's a lot of competition at the bottom. He said, but the guys I really enjoy, they still like to compete, and we're still, and I'm like, see it, but you can still win-win so that everybody wins, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and that's the lens that I use. Is everything for me has to be win-win or no deal these days. And I
Absolutely.
wasn't always like that. I wasn't always mature enough to understand that. But and I had it was actually one of the owners of our old company, and he loved to negotiate. Now he's a really good guy, but he loved to negotiate so hard that nobody would play with him again. And I told him one day, I said, man, you come off as greedy. He goes, no, I'm not greedy. I just love it. I said, but here's the thing. It's got to be win-win.
Mhm.
If it's not win-win, you might get this one, but they're not going to deal with you again. Like, you get to play with more folks. You get to keep playing.
Right.
If you're in business, you need to make money. If they're in business, they need to make money. Cool. How do we make more money together?
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Well, Jim, I want to, during this show, and I hope that we've grasped this. So if there's anything else that you want to add right here, but if we look at doing business with people, right? We want to do business with people we trust, we like, and we understand. So I wanted to encompass this show with, you know, yes, you've lost weight, you've changed this, we've talked about that. We could go into so many different variations, but I wanted this show to suffice to show people that, you know, this guy was not voted most likely to succeed, as we've learned in this show, right? It
that's
was
right.
the most trustworthy. There's different things that he has done, and now where you're at, and you've been to every level. You give people, hey, I could do that too. I can do that, and I can. Well, maybe I can't get where Jim is. Maybe I can't bowl backwards, but I can help my son get this business started. I can show this, you know. So you bring so much more than just a business coach or teaching somebody how to exit this, and that. So I wanted to paint the whole picture. So what did we miss about Jim? Is there a secret talent? Is there something that, I've asked this question to a few people, and I got to answer that. One lady goes out when everybody goes to bed, and she dances out in her cul-de-sac, and she hopes nobody's watching, but it's freeing for her. And I said, once this airs, everybody's going to be looking out the window. So what? Is there something that, Jim, is there something you do?
Man, I'm pretty much an open book. I don't mind talking about things. When I started this health journey, I was on a podcast with my doctor, and I said, "You can share my results. You can share what medication I'm on. You can share what my lipid panels. I'm an open book. It might help somebody."
Right.
And so, the selfish thing that I want is every single podcast that I do, every one that I'm on, every guest that I have on. My hope is that somebody listening can take just one nugget and improve their life with it. I'm not the expert on all things. In fact, I made my living by not being the expert, but I knew the experts.
There you go.
I'm the guy who knew who to call, but I'm not the guy. And I would encourage people in business. It's the same way. You don't have to be an expert in every discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Just, dig in, go hard enough in order to be able to get it to where you can hire some of those experts or get some of that expert knowledge so that you don't have to go through that you could go around or you
Right.
could speed up through.
Right.
And that's really it. On the health side of things, there's no shortcut. Just get in there, get after it. The short version is from freshman year of high school, I was 260 to 305. And for all of my adult life up to age 40. And at age 40, I had a wake up call like no other. It should have been a fantastic day. I was interviewed on Dave Ramsey's show for the Millionaire Hour.
Right.
My goal, mine and my wife's goal, was to get to a $1 million net worth before my 40th birthday and not have a single penny of debt nowhere. Well, we did it with a week to spare.
Yeah.
2 days before my birthday, I go on his show. It should have been fantastic.
Right.
I get done. They send me the video footage, and I am disgusted at how old and sick I look. I get upstairs. I look around the room, and my team looks tired and sick and overweight. And the final straw that just broke the camel's back is I was downstairs. I was about to pull out on Church Street, leaving the City Club, and it pops up that Facebook, the most liked picture of the year, was my son eating a donut. And I thought I'm leading myself wrong. I'm leading my team wrong. I'm leading my family wrong. And I pulled over on the side of the road and I cried.
Yeah.
39-year-old, 39, 2 days from being 40, I pull over on the side of the road and cry like a baby.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how I was going to do it. I was like, but I mean, if I can't use the knowledge and the skill set and the wealth that I've created in order to fix this, then what good am I? Right. And so, I lost about 80 pounds. Total, I'm down about 90 now from where I was. I want to get down 120 pounds total. I'm shooting for getting in that 185 range. And man, I haven't been at 185 since I was 11 years old. I was in the 200s from 11 up.
Well,
And
I'll interrupt you real quick, Jim, because I do want to share this pain with you. You just reminded me when I was 11 years old, my parents checked me into my brother. I hope he sees this because he still to this day makes fun of me. They checked me into what was called Less Eat Smart Than Exercise Right, which was basically a fat count for kids. And at 11, I was 5'2", 173 pounds, I think, when I checked in there. So I got a little taller, but for me, I can appreciate, right now I'm 235, 240, but I have been 300. I've been there, and I know how I feel now versus then. But as we get there, here's something that I kind of want to finishing it. It was something that I stole from that Hiders podcast because you said something about the 80% or the all the way. Like that got me fired up, bro. I was going to get I would say hair, but I just get a beard these days. So I was going to get that. I'm listening to it. I'm like, yeah, let's finish it. Let's go. So we'll kind of wrap up there.
Well, in life, people keep that. They might have a goal. They get out there. They're scared to write it down. They, they get good enough, and then they get comfortable. And it was actually from a Nick Hyder episode. He said that he had a coach tell him one time, or a guest tell him, that you had to go all the way. You had to go all the way, and don't ease up when you get close. That's what's driving me right now. Is I want to get all the way, because I've done this before. I've gotten 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I got down to about 220 pounds, and then just stalled out, went back up to about 240, and then just I'm getting older, I'm getting wiser, and it's like, what? There's no better. I'm never going to feel better. I'm never going to be younger than I am today. I might as well get about getting it done.
Yeah.
And selfishly, I want to live to 100.
Yeah.
Maybe beyond. And so I'm not I don't claim to be an expert on health, but I did go get my knees done via stem cell therapy a year and a half ago. Best decision, aside from losing 100 pounds, best decision of my adult life.
Right.
And just understand you have to be your own advocate, whether that's in business, whether that's in parenting, whether that is in health. It doesn't matter. Nobody's coming to save you. You got to figure it out. You got to be strong enough to get up and keep charging forward.
Mm-hmm. Jim, normally towards the end of the show, right there at the end, I ask somebody to share a nugget, a piece of advice. And brother, you've hit so many different things. So let me flip it here. I'm putting you on the spot. This is, whatever. But as far as your faith, is there a story? Is there something that we could kind of, because there's a lot of people right now that they say, well, should we talk about this? Should we not? And I made it a point to say, you know what? I've been a Christian my whole life, but I've never told anybody. I've been a man that would pray for you, but I would never go up and maybe put my hand on your shoulder and pray for you. And now to be around guys, I'm on the phone with a friend of mine in Vegas, and at the end of the call, I mean, if you saw he and I come out of a place, you'd probably think we've been riding motorcycles or drinking something or, and we pray for each other. And it's like, man, that's cool. So is there something there that you could share with us? Because I just want to encourage those.
Yeah, the best advice I can give there, and again, I'm not going to claim to be the expert, but this is my best practice, and that is teach your kids to pray. Amen. My son, we take turns. I do it one night, he does it the next night, my wife does it the next night. We take turns. There's not a specific rotation. It's just, and there's no criticism of the prayer.
Amen.
It's just we pray together as a family.
Yeah.
We add those names or add people that we need to pray for and think about and those types of things. But if your kids don't grow up with the ability to talk to God,
Mm-hmm.
how do we expect that they're gonna get that skill later in life? I mean,
Right.
as I tear up here at the end, but I mean,
That's all
you know,
good.
it's up to us.
Yeah.
You know, unfortunately I had a conversation with somebody that I used to know really well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, somebody was talking about their family and that, you know, their 15, 16-year-old had proclaimed that, you know, they were an atheist.
Okay.
And I mean, it almost brought me to tears right then. It's like, you know, how did we go so wrong,
Yeah.
or what happened
What happened? Yeah.
to cause that?
Right.
You know, we have influence over our kids. You know, predominantly the first 18 years. They say statistically, we get one more year with them total after 18.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you going to fix that later? You're not. You know, believe what you believe in and teach it. And don't be afraid because somebody else said you're not supposed to. I mean, I don't conform if it's something that I feel strongly about. I mean, it could be 50 people saying no, you don't need to talk about that. I'm going to talk about it.
Amen.
You know.
So, Jim, man, I can't wait till we get to sit down and talking and learn some more. And I get this studio up there, and I'm already thinking that, you know, we can change the backgrounds and maybe you and I take this thing on the road and go do some shows that you hadn't been able to schedule. And we can do a lot more. Thank God for the people that brought us together, Jim.
Yeah, man, absolutely.
Man, nugget after nugget. And I told my wife, this is something cool for me. And this is a thank you. How many not only millionaires, but Christian, godly men who are talking about teaching their kids to pray, teaching their kids right from wrong, man. Thank you for just not being ashamed of doing that, brother. Thank you so much.
Well, if we're ashamed of what we're doing, then we're probably doing the wrong thing, or we don't have the spine in order to stand up for what's right. The two. So, but you know, get out there and be who you are. You know, I don't think I would still be earning that moniker of most trustworthy if I wasn't telling the truth. You know, with you today. And
Amen.
so, you know, be who you are and don't apologize for it.
Jim, brother, thank you so much for your time. And thank you guys for watching Podcast on Wheels.